Veterans for Peace Forum. I wanted to thank you. Last month we had Adam Brock Ceresi, who is a muralist, and we had a great conversation there. There are many things that are going on right now in our in our community. As a veteran with Veterans for Peace, you'll see I'm wearing a t-shirt, Vietnam Full Disclosure. Right now there is a series on called the Ken Burns and Lynn Novick Vietnam documentary series being played on Oregon Public Broadcasting and through PBS stations around the country. It's a critical film on Vietnam, 10 years in the making. There's 10 programs, 18 hours. So we had the first 5 this last week. It started from Sunday to Thursday, and next week it'll start up again on Sunday. As you watch these programs, you know, for veterans, let's just say there should be a little bit of a warning. You could be triggered by some of the experiences there. I know in the first episode, and when I saw this person being carried out of by a helicopter, you know, on a litter basket to bring him up after he'd been wounded, took me right back into a virtual scene that I had experienced when I was in Vietnam. And I saw that in a preview in July 24th at the Arlene Schnitzer Hall when Ken Burns and Lynn were here, and there was General McPeak also, and Dave Miller of Think Out Loud was moderating it. And in that scene, it literally took me back. Kind of freaked out because it seemed like a long experience for me. It was a very thing that happened to me when I was in Vietnam. There was a point in which I was we were up in the mountains in the jungle, and I had my machine gun pointing out of the perimeter out towards the jungle valleys, and I just reached down, sad to say, with this get a drag on a cigarette, and I felt something go past the hairs of my neck. I heard a crack, and the guy down beside me was shot. Whether he lived or died, I don't know. I was probably in shock. I just remember a little bit of the us cutting down some branches to make way for the litter basket to come down. They picked him up and took him out. Well, then I watched the series again when it started up here, so I see the whole thing instead of just a few clips, and I actually couldn't see that little program, and I wrote about it. I said, I don't know, was I imagining this? And then friends told me, no, that was in the first few minutes of the program as they were opening it up. And I went back and looked at it, and it was so brief that that's not my experience when I first saw it. It went on for quite a while in my head, and it took me a while to get my head around. So that's just a fair warning to veterans. I've been having trouble sleeping at night. You know, a couple days, I only had an hour's sleep in 2 days because this stuff is playing over in my head over and over. Though I've been dealing with this for, you know, since I left the Marine Corps in 1969, October of 1969. So that's been, you know, plenty of time that you'd think that this would be gone, but it's not. So I want people to know and realize that. Now there's full disclosure is watching it. We have a number of authors, veterans, Vietnam veterans, conscientious objectors, deserters, people who oppose the war. There's members of the anti-war movement of that time. From the periods, you know, they had Tom Hasty, they had a number of, Tom Hayden, excuse me, others. Hayden, though, has passed away. But, you know, when we think about the anti-war movement, we have to think about, you know, where we're going today. And why does Vietnam still matter? I've been asked that question so many times. And for me, looking at that film, there's a review out there called the Macon Review, which pretty much says, kind of in the very beginning of that I feel, and that is in the first, you know, the first few sentences, it says that, you know, people of good intentions, you know, went to war basically in good faith, you know, and made mistakes. Well, if we really look at the history, Vietnam was no mistake. It was a planned and calculated move. We had the French that were there before. The film explains some of that, but at the same time, I don't think you can talk about good intentions when we were there to support the recolonization of Vietnam after World War II, and the Vietnamese had liberated themselves from the French. So I want people to pay close attention to that. Vietnam, full disclosure, has many critiques out there, and one thing that this show does bring in is the view of the Vietnamese, the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, and their perspective. They're veterans, and there's one gentleman there, Bao Nem, who wrote a book called Sorrow of War, and I had not heard of that book before, but a colleague that was watching it with me said that was one of the best books he had ever read on Vietnam. And so I went out and bought it. I read it, and I have to agree. And when I looked at the back cover, the Independent said it was one of those books that was in the same category as All Quiet on the Western Front. But it went beyond that, because there's a love story, there's tragedy, there's a story about writing a book. And for me, it had the image in my mind, epic of Dr. Zhivago almost, and Dostoevsky's incredible novels, where there's a lot of philosophy, a lot of ideas about the morality of war and the killing of people, even though you have enemies coming towards you. That's the struggle that veterans and most of us are struggling with, how to interpret the meaning of all this. For me, it's as simple as the Vietnamese would not bow, and if you didn't bow, you died. And that's the sad truth about war, and I think people should pay attention to that. We have, to me, we have right now why this is important, because we have to learn about the history of those resistors of the war and why they resisted, what they were thinking about while it was going on. And during the Vietnam War, there were GI resistors. There became veterans called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I, of course, am with Vietnam, with Veterans for Peace that came out of that movement. And so I want people to pay attention to, what the resistance was about and why we continue to talk about this stuff, because we are in a number of perpetual wars. We have Afghanistan, Iraq, we've had Syria, we're supporting Yemen, we're in Somalia, numerous countries, and plus we're building bases all over the world. We have over 800 to 1,000 bases throughout the world, and and I've talked before about being in Okinawa and Jeju Island, where the people have been protesting for a number of years to remove those bases from their countries. They still suffering from World War II, and they have legacies of people being massacred, and they don't want to be a part of being in between these great giants. And you've just heard Trump, our insane president, I would say, who is talking about annihilating the people of North Korea. 25 million or more people, and he just wipe off the map with nuclear weapons. And what's going to happen? I don't know what the hell he's thinking about, but that can start a nuclear war with Russia and China, and all life on this planet could be lost. So we need people to stop kidding around and just talking about this, but stopping it, getting out in the streets. I have an incredible guest here today, a good friend, Hector Hernadez, who's a muralist, and we go back to Metro Mural group that we had, many years ago, when we were even fighting for the rights to have murals in Portland.
Yes.
Hector just did a talk at the Portland Art Museum about murals and community and stuff. We also, if we think about the things that are happening, he comes out of the Mexican mural tradition, and has worked with a number of immigrant groups here. Pacun, the Farm Workers Union here, housing for murals on some of the housing for the people that live here, and we talk about culture. There's kind of an earthquake of information that we're dealing with. So when you just heard about the hurricanes, and we heard about the 7.1 earthquake in Mexico, and you have a sort of perspective on that and social change. You want to talk a little bit about that as we get started?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and having me here. Have the opportunity to talk about these subjects. And yes, I started approaching the subject of natural disasters and social change because I did my thesis when I was doing my university studies in Mexico City. And one of the events that happens at that time was the eruption of the Chichonal volcano in 1994, actually. And actually, that was 1982, because I think St. Helens erupted first here, yeah?
Oh, I remember that, too.
Yeah, and then after that, 2 years later, so we had the eruption of the Chichonal volcano in Mexico, in Chiapas. Then I was intrigued because I received information from other colleagues about the consequences and also the impact of the eruption of the volcano in those rural communities in southern Mexico. And then is when I decided to go there and do the studies and see the impact on those communities, and it was fascinating because there are impacts in different levels. Of course, it's like not only the ecology, it's not only the change or the social change, in the economy, but also culturally. So in terms of culture, it was because my focus was social anthropology. I was intrigued by seeing different reactions from people based on their cultural beliefs and religious beliefs. Some of those communities decided to evacuate the area before the eruption of the volcano because it was their religious leader or the spiritual leader, so to speak, announced them that according to the archangels and Michael told them that the eruption will happen and they have to evacuate. Against that decision of the official position. And other communities around the volcano decided not to evacuate because they were basically following the orders of the official, the official announcements. And then you have different communities taking their own decisions based on what the government says or what the government doesn't say, so their religious So that is part of what intrigued me. So of course we have the eruption of the volcano, so the people that they evacuate ahead of time, so they were able to survive. But the people that they decided not to, and they were in the proximities of the volcano, and they ended up dying. So that was one of the subjects that intrigues me, and also to see what are the consequences and the impact of social life. Then that was in 1984 when I was doing those studies there. Then we have the big one, the earthquake in Mexico City in 1984. That creates a huge social impact in Mexico City. So since then, we have a process of empowerment of the civil society in Mexico City. Mm-hmm. And then we start seeing the transformation of the political scene in Mexico with one ruling party only into the decomposition of that power into different parties taking over. And the consequence of that earthquake in 1985 was basically that the city became left-wing administration by the PRD, basically ended up dying that. So it was not immediate. We haven't identified until was during the 90s when the left party took over and that administration of the city. And since then, Mexico City is, of course, is one of the most liberal cities. So that, and basically the left-wing policies that they implement basically helps to create that. So that is, for example, one of the consequences of how an earthquake impacts that societies. Mm-hmm. And it's a catalysis for change. So those changes, of course, they were brewing before, and they were like a part of the political scene in Mexico before the earthquake. But the Mexican earthquake basically helps to mobilize people in the streets and taking over, like the scenes that you see now with the earthquake right now. So that happens, curiously, the same day, September 19th, 30 years later, 32 years later. That was a coincidence. And then what you see as the response of the people is go to the streets, go to the collapsed buildings, trying to rescue people there as an initiative from the civil society, regardless and without waiting the official response of the people.
Well, it's, I mean, Mexico's had a long history of back and forth between liberal and conservative or right wing, and then when you have these situations where the government fails the people, then people are looking for new ways to reorganize their government, their way of responding to these things, both politically, just make a living. How do you begin to survive after something like this? How do we provide for people, distribute the things they need, water, food, shelter?
Housing, yeah. So basically that is what happens. So that people start organizing to demand all those services as well, housing and food. And the way that they organize basically make effective the way that they took control on their own communities,
Right.
And that was part of the process that triggers the earthquake in 1985.
Has this created people actually even fleeing Mexico at all as a refugee?
No, actually, the process of the immigration process that we see in the United States from Mexico is a long process. I mean, it's not something that is new.
Right.
So as long as we see the economy of the United States requiring and needing labor, so the United States is going to take the labor for whatever means.
Right.
So like immigrants from India or immigrants from China or immigrants from Mexico. So of course the proximity of Mexico is a way to guarantee, that labor that the United States needs.
Right.
So, and the people that have been crossing the border between Mexico and the United States is a long process. It's nothing new. It's nothing.
But they talk about
undocumented immigrants, yeah, because it's, I mean, just to make a comment, it's like using the term illegal is inappropriate in legal terms. Yeah. So that's why we want to use it's not because we are politically correct using the term undocumented. It's beyond that. So I mean, it's like it's undocumented. So, but the thing is that it's a long process of immigration. So when you have the boom of the agricultural industry in the United States during the 50s after the war, and during the 60s, and how the economy in the United States keeps growing. So it's when they need that labor. And basically what you see in Mexico, especially during the crisis of 1880, during the 80s, and particularly the implementation of NAFTA during the 90s.
Right.
So it's when you see that the policies that the Mexican government implemented, economic policies implemented, was basically an open economy that was not anymore closed. With the globalization, but also favoring corporations of Mexico and United States.
Corporations could go across the border, but people couldn't, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that basically what happens in this process. All this they also favor agricultural corporations, in which the peasants, the Mexican peasant, that they have a legacy of knowledge and wisdom from pre-Columbian times, they couldn't compete with the agribusiness from the northern Mexico that they produce, a lot. So and also the prices basically they cannot compete with those prices. So that's why they ended up like abandoning, communities, in particular from the 90s after NAFTA. So then you see a huge flow of immigration during that period in the United States, but also the United States was able to absorb that labor.
Right.
That's what we see here, not only in the agricultural sector, but also in services as well. But as the Mexican economy grew during this period of time, And in particular, in the late to the 2010s, that period. So the Mexican government started developing projects of infrastructure and also other investments, along with foreign investments and the economy. So and also the policies of anti-immigration policies that we have in the United States creates also an environment for immigrants not to come to the United States. That's when we see, even at the end of the 2010 and the beginning of this 2012, 13, 14, a decrease on the immigration from Mexico.
Right.
So because they don't want to risk anymore, and then the people that they are here because they closed the border, basically after September 11. So the people that usually they go back and forth between Mexico and the United States, they were not able to do that, and then they got here. So with because they have fears that they won't be able to come back to the United States.
Well, there were a lot of children that were brought here and grew up. A lot of them didn't even know that they were not citizens, and now this is what they call the DACA, the Dreamers, those that are going to college and schools here. And this Trump administration is talking about ending DACA, which, from what I just read today, was that they're no longer accepting any applications for DACA, but renewals come up October 5th, I believe. And it's really in question, and people need to, that's where people are out on the streets trying to get their representatives to recognize we need to keep this door open for people. These are people that lived here all their lives and are contributing to our community, and will do even more to contribute when they graduate.
Yeah, because they don't know any other country that United States.
Yeah.
They don't even know Mexico. Sometimes they don't even speak Spanish.
The language, yeah.
So there are many cases. In addition to that, so what we have to keep in mind is that they are not just only students or professionals now integrated and contributing to the economy of the United States. They are members of families.
Yes.
And if they're deported, they destroy families as well.
That's right.
And they basically destroyed also communities at large. We're not talking about the Latino community. So because the impact of and the contributions of this segment of the population have an impact on the economy in general, so that creates more jobs. And the tendency of Latinos in general, and particular Mexican immigrants, is to create jobs too. So because they create their own businesses at the same time. So because there are many situations in which they don't want to be employees, because they have to provide all this paperwork. So instead of that, they prefer to create their own business, and in that way they can pay taxes as well. Of course, they are not able to get, the benefits of Social Security, but they
Which
are
means they're funding Social Security for people.
And then, exactly, because they are subsidizing the economy of the United States.
Exactly.
But it looks like this administration has policy of whited out the population of the United States. So because
purely racist, in my opinion. But
yes, I mean basically is what they have. You see all the people that they are surrounding the administration, that they are having all these backgrounds with white supremacists or extreme right, with this kind of ideology that basically appeals to one model of society in which minorities or people of colors are basically out of the picture. So you just see the administration of this current administration, that there's no diversity. So that speaks volumes about that. So then especially now, that is basically a systematic attack on the Latino community that we see.
Well, I mean, your background as anthropologist, social anthropologist, is amazing. But you're also an artist, and how does this knowledge and concerns relate to your artwork as a muralist? I wanted to tell you, when you were at the museum talking about this, the artist talk, that one of our friends, Isako Shamsuddin, is a great artist, a muralist. He's also in this book right here, Walls of Heritage. Let me put that up here. These are African American and artists. And Isako, I think I had him on the program some years back. and I haven't heard from him for a while. Have you heard from him?
No, not recently, but it was a nice experience working with him in one of the murals. Especially that mural that is located at 21st.
Yeah.
21st and Everett at the Musicians Union wall. Yeah.
But one thing that he told me, he says, I'm not a muralist. I'll paint murals, but he says, I'm a studio artist, but he says, Hector Hernandez is the real muralist. I don't know if you ever heard him say that, but I wanted to tell you that because I thought, what a great compliment.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. I mean, I really appreciate that comment because, I'm trying to keep working in spite of, the many regulations and the environment, the lack of diversity of the city, too. Because, sometimes minority art is being perceived like folk or, funky or not quite art, not quite fine art. And, I appreciate that comment from Isaka. And I can understand why he says that he is a studio artist. I love his work. It's very powerful.
Oh, it is.
And has a lot of
I call
energy.
him a muralist.
But my work is more like to reach audiences. Basically, that is basically what motivates me more to when I work in this kind of project. So,
well, you studied also at the alt school, is that right? And can you tell people a little bit about that school and the three muralists that are famous for Mexico?
Well, curiously, so now I have this image that came to my mind that I started my studies in anthropology, and then when I was finishing my studies in anthropology, I saw a painter doing a mural in my university, and that his name is Arnold Belkin, that is a Northwest painter from Vancouver, BC, a Mexican painter, Canadian origin. And he was the disciple of Siqueiros, one of the three big mural painters. And then I asked him, so can I help you? And he says, yes. Well, I start painting with him, and he liked my work, so then he hired me for the next project, mural painting, that basically was done also at my university. And now somebody sent me this week the image of that mural and got damaged for the earth during the earthquake.
Oh, wow.
So the thing is that, I was introduced by Arnold Belkin to work on mural painting, and it was the first time for me having an idea about what this will be the public art. So, and how easy a piece of artwork like a mural painting could be. So the target could be the target of criticism and also support too. So because it's out there. So, and since that experience, so I was interested in working on murals, and then I really like working on large scale as well, because you have to have another focus, another kind of perspective, or kind of different elements of design that to approach, the composition that you have on murals. So, and since I did my studies here at the University of Oregon and Oregon State University, I finished 2 masters. One master's in art and education, and the other it was on fine arts from the University of Oregon. And then as I was finishing my studies there, is when I started receiving invitations to paint murals. So my first mural was for the Memorial Union at Oregon State University, which I like to share.
Do you have that up there?
No, I don't have it. I mean, I have it in another format that we can display, but I have other images that they are related to earthquakes.
Okay.
And then, if you want, we can talk about that, because those
that's this one here.
Work, it was inspired by the earthquake in LA, the Northridge earthquake, and basically was taking the elements of the destruction of the cities, because sometimes the cities are growing, keep growing, but they don't have elements of planning based on the a sustainable relationship with nature. So basically, I was working in this kind of elements. Also, I include the car. So because during the earthquake in Mexico City, I saw how the cars were like pretty much smashed by the rubble that they fell into them. We have another mural, so that
Let's go to,
yeah, that image is the one that I did. This is a print made on wood.
Okay, wood block. Okay.
In wood block. And then what I did in this case was to reproduce the image I saw during the second earthquake, so the replica in 1985. So the first earthquake hits in September 19, so it creates a lot of devastation. People were fleeing for their lives, and something that I didn't see because I was inside of a building. It was early morning. So, and then after that day, so then I start exploring and see the possibilities of helping in the streets. And then the second day, I decided to jump into the rubble, basically, and to the remainings of the buildings. And I decided to go on the top one of those buildings and start using, you know, the shovels and the picks to destroy the slabs, the concrete slabs, to hoping to break them at one point and see people that they were under there.
Rescue anybody that was there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I was on the top of that. It was during the night, early, probably it was around 7 or 8. And then I started feeling the replica. That was a powerful replica.
Oh, wow.
And then I felt all the shaking and movement of the remainings of the building, and I saw buildings around me, pretty much like that way. And then I saw a tall building like that, collapsing in a cloud of dust. That is exactly those the images that you can see now if you go to social media.
Yeah.
Basically, just what you can see.
I've seen some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and
like watching 9/11 almost. Yeah, really.
Yeah. So then, yeah, pretty much because basically those are buildings collapsing. Of course, it was like a traumatic experience. So after that, I think the army and the Mexican army took over pretty much and didn't allow any more civilians to basically jump into the remainings of the buildings.
Right.
So it was more a coordination of the army, and then this is when they decided to develop all these plans of contingency for disasters in a more effective way. They have that before. So during the earthquake, during the eruption of the volcano in Chiapas, it was very effective the way that the army took over. But in this case, it was in Mexico City. So then they took over and basically they keep away the intervention of the civil society. But still, by that time, so the civil society have a very good sense of empowerment.
Right.
So if we have another image around that.
Let me add something here too.
Sure.
One, because you reminded me of the military taking over. We had these horrible hurricanes in Texas and Florida and along the coast and in the islands. One of the things that bothers me as a veteran for peace is that we were sending National Guard to war when we need them here. They need to be prepared and always prepared. I would love to see our military, instead of killing people, saving lives, being out there and being prepared for national disasters. These are the kinds of things that are positive that our military could do in different forms. So I hope that you say that to our governor here, bring those troops home for Texas, for Florida, wherever these disasters are. We don't know what's going to happen in Oregon. Anything can happen. We had the fires. I knew a lot of veterans that were working on the fires here out in the gorge. So it's a good thing. Let's bring our troops home. Let's deal with repairing our communities, and I just wanted to put that out there. And we can
that is interesting because the Mexican people have this kind of like love-hate relationship with the army. Love because they intervene and they distribute health, food, water, and they rebuild some of the communities too. But sometimes hate because they are sometimes receiving orders from the Mexican government to repress areas and intervene in some communities, repressing them. So then that's why it's very, very complicated, the relationship that they have with the army. But yeah, I mean, it's when we have all these natural disasters, that they are a lot during this year. And Mexico has 3 hurricanes in this year only. So one in Cabo San Lucas, another one called by Veracruz and the Gulf Coast, and another one that that crashed into the Pacific coast too as well, not far from the epicenter of the first earthquake happens. Okay. So we have 2 bigger earthquakes, and 3 hurricanes. So then is when the government activates, the participation of the army and also the marine as well. So
well, good thing they're not in some numerous wars throughout the.
No, actually, we don't perceive the Mexican army like as an intervention force or like abroad or by any means. So it's totally out of the picture. That's why we still have this kind of relationship with the army. Yeah,
that's good to know. So the next image up here, let's see if we can get that up here. Okay.
Yeah, that is interesting, that image, because...
and where is that?
That is a proposal of a mural.
Okay.
So it was interesting because that is a remake, because the original image, it was a collaboration between 3 artists. One is a Spanish artist that came to visit and work on the mural that I was painting with Arnold Belkin. And then after we finished that project, we decided, so why don't we propose a project for painting a mural? And then I said yes, because I was working on my thesis about the Chichonal volcano and the eruption into the communities. Then I decided to include the theme of the eruption of a volcano and the social change. So, but that's why this is a remake, because at the end, in the first version, I put a generic city, pretty much. So, and then the original is in the hands of this Spanish artist. I don't know who is he. So now he's Linaza. His name is Enrique Linaza. I don't know if he's in Spain right now or here in the United States. But it's a good question, because now I'm going to do my Google search and try to track him out.
Yeah, there you go.
So, and then in this case, for example, in the remake of that original, so I decided to include the images of actual buildings that collapsed in Mexico City.
What is the cover over the mouth there?
What we have in here is the depiction of the natural disasters hitting the city. We have elements of destruction. So we have a door that is the gate on the foreground, mimicking the actual door of the building that we were intended to paint. So that's why we had to add it in somehow, that because it was for the Mercado Abelardo Rodriguez, that is a market, the public market for the downtown Mexico City. Okay. So, and it's full of mural paintings from different artists, from different traditions, even from a Japanese one and Japanese artists as well, from other artists of the Mexican School of Painting. And we decided to propose a mural for that Mercado market facilities, and then depicting the impact of natural disasters, and also painted the image of the youth being constrained and being captive by, the repressive forces that we have in society. But and then we have the youth depicting that image. So curiously, we submit this proposal before the earthquake in 1985. And then we submitted that to one of the art historians in Mexico, and says, yeah, I mean, you have...
You're saying that it's the Jews that are being oppressed there? Or you're talking about the
people in general.
Oh, people in general.
People in general, but of course, because the image is like a dark-skinned person, represented the people in general, yeah.
I just heard Jew, and I was trying to think,
no.
That seemed, I didn't know.
Youth, I say youth. Youth. Yeah, no, the youth. And in that way, what we're trying to represent is like because of the conditions, social conditions of repression, it is likely that a natural disaster will unleash that force. And I remember
okay, I gotcha, yeah.
that after that earthquake, so we couldn't continue with that project because that construction, that facility of the public market ended up being damaged. But it was curious that the art historian told us, well, you basically were looking ahead of time, so what could happen in Mexico, and basically that is basically what I try to bring also in this kind of works that I'm doing, is to bring that the social changes that we have in our societies is an interaction of so many factors, not only political parties,
Right.
but also the participation of nature is essential, is there.
When I think of, I'm thinking of Mexican muralists. Diego Rivera comes to mind, one of the great muralists, and David Sicarios and Orozco. How would you? I mean, you can actually, Diego did fresco, and we go back to fresco. We go back to ancient times and Roman and Greek periods of times. And some of those murals that existed back then are the historical and anthropological data of records of history that isn't even written. It's that found in those murals that it lasted all those years. So important things, but. Diego did a number of murals, even here in the United States. I keep thinking of the one for the Rockefeller Center, and then he had gotten...
he was destroyed,
Yeah, it was destroyed. Well, he got permission for it, and they covered it up, and they were going to destroy it. And so he redid it down in Mexico, and he put
Mexico City.
Rockefeller with syphilis over his head, and his little pun to them, I'm going to redo this. But I can't think of him without thinking of Frida Kahlo and Trotsky,
Trotsky,
and them taking Trotsky, and he was a leftist, a communist, who took in this socialist that was that Stalin was trying to kill, and eventually, and then I guess David Sicarios actually tried to at one point assassinate.
Basically he was. They pressed charges against him because he was involved in that attempt of assassination of Trotsky at one point. So, and that was, but of course, the position of Siqueiros was more radical than Rivera and the left-wing movement in Mexico.
Right.
Both of them belong to the Communist Party. But of course, for the position of Rivera was as the Soviet Union became more radical and more totalitarian, so the position of Rivera became more flexible in terms of empowering the civil society in general. That's why the role of Trotsky was so important, because that's why he supported Trotsky in that aspect. So, and at the end, he ended up being assassinated by the orders of Stalin in Mexico City.
Yeah.
But we have these two cases of Siqueiros and Rivera. But in terms of Orozco was very skeptical about political standing.
Right.
So he was very critical. He was very skeptical about the benefits of a social revolution. Of course, he acknowledged some of those benefits, but at the end, he saw carnage and those movements, mass movement that was irrational. And for him, it was more critical to see the evolution of men in a general way, in a holistic way. But he understood that evolution has to go through a process of social convulsion. So he understood.
Was his work more spiritual in a sense?
In a way, yes. In a way, yes. I mean, he was criticizing.
Symbolic, a metaphor. Kind of,
so he was criticizing the powers, the extreme right as well in Mexico. He was very critical about that, but also he was very critical about how the mass movements could be totally irrational.
Yeah,
and
manipulated.
And manipulated, and that is basically that. He was not like the typical utopian idealist like we saw on Rivera. He was more skeptical in that position.
Yeah, I know that I went back to when I was doing my master's, I did a study abroad in Italy, and one of the things that I studied there was actually the futurists and and the Mussolini and his, giving an open door to a lot of the arts and stuff. But at the same time, there's very creative people, but there was a sort of propaganda within the arts. He used every method in which
exactly like a Hitler. They used every method, and they were like a very effective in terms of the propaganda. It was like a cutting edge in terms of the techniques, in terms of the approach that they have, especially when they were talking, using mass media there at the time. So then. But
and there was also agitprop, during the Russian Revolution. So when we talk about social murals, propaganda, and then there's your murals. They're dealing with culture and history and bringing that. How do you see the differences between these?
Yeah, for example, and that is interesting because what you see in the Mexican muralist movement, and that and you see the works of Diego Rivera, Siqueiros, or Orozco, is that even if they were working with the government, even if they were being supported by the government and had all these commissions, still they have that freedom of criticism of the government. So that is very different from the typical images that we saw of Conrad Mao or Conrad Stalin or Conrad Lenin. That is basically this kind of like idealization of those political figures. So in which all the working class is happy, following the leader, and everything is fine, and finally the justice of the people is done because the working class is basically redeemed by them. But in this case, what you see with Siqueiros, even Siqueiros, that was the more radical in the communist movement, he was also critical about that as well. So and then he has a criticism that you see on his works, and that is the difference that you see, that this movement is really an artistic movement that has not this kind of like a compromising position that you saw on the other movements of the social realism that you see in China or in on Russia. So, but of course, you see the more extreme cases with the Stalin, with the Nazis or with the fascists, that they trying to create all this art, glorifying or justifying or basically making an apology of those regimes too.
As sometimes these films, these documentaries do.
Yeah, and basically that is what the artists and also the intellectuals become aligned, to some ideologies, and that is basically what you see. That's why I rescue a lot of the Mexican mural movement, that they didn't get compromised in that process. So that's the position, for example, when the Rockefeller Center mural case. So he, when he was asked to erase the images of Lenin or Marx or the communist leaders, so he decided he refuses, say no, I don't want to compromise. So and then basically that is the position. So and he was, you as an artist, you have the option to refuse and not to be censured, so and not compromise in that way. So, but in that way, there are other moments in which they ask you to change things, and you can change things as long as you don't compromise your basic principles, basically. So
and then there's also the preservation of murals here, and then how those are preserved. The sun and light can destroy sometimes, and there's new technologies. Siqueiros actually switched from painting directly to spray painting and using new technologies.
Yeah, we see this the spray can everywhere, no, but those techniques were used first, I mean,
Yeah.
by Siqueiros, and basically Siqueiros started using acrylic.
Yeah.
So we know the acrylic paint is like a very popular now, and everybody's using now, and the schools, you know, because it's water-based. So, but that is the kind of technique that he proposed to be used for artistic purposes.
Right.
Of course, it was industrially developed before, but the artists didn't use them, and then Siqueiros says, no, if we want to have a new art, the new art has to use new materials.
Yeah.
You cannot paint the new art with old materials.
Uh-huh.
So, and that's why Europe didn't adopt acrylic paint.
But there is a sort of sense that
At the beginning.
sometimes that the arts actually relive the old methods, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
you know, black photography, black and white photography, and still using film. There's a certain kind of quality to it. Or when you do, like I do, you know, wood blocks, linoleum cuts, old method, but it has its own sort of aesthetic to it,
Yeah,
which I
mean,
love, you know.
Yeah, they have their own properties, you know,
Yeah.
quality and textures
Yeah.
and physical properties. Yeah, that basically you keep using those techniques.
Yeah.
But if you are like an artist, that you remember that artists basically are in the search and exploration
Right.
of different means to achieve their ultimate goal, that is freedom of expression
That's right.
through aesthetics means.
Yeah,
Aesthetic means.
when I had Adam on here last month, when I was asking him how he painted it, you know, he all of it was spray can. You know, he says, and they
Yeah.
got now. He says it's more like airbrush almost. They have all these different types of
Yeah,
spray
and-
cans. I didn't even know that.
So yeah, they have different nozzles, and they have the different things that they can use for a spray can. I don't use it, so I have some spray cans there that once in a while I do the retouchings and
Retouching, yeah.
and those things. When I was painting this mural with Arnold Belkin, not the mural that I was mentioning that was damaged, but all the other mural, he was using the spray gun. So for
Did we have
working.
more images here too?
So let me see if we have more images.
Do we
can
have more
comment
images
about
there?
other works. So
yeah, here's one.
yeah, this is basically the first painting that I did here when I was studying at Portland State University. I mean, not Portland State, Oregon State University. And that was basically I was playing with the different elements of composition. And basically I was putting the images of the Aztec ruins along with the ruins of the city that was collapsed. So, but the emerging hope represented on the sky of the new era. So, and then at the bottom we see the images of people being trapped by the ruins, and a survivor of that in that process. So.
And there's another mural.
Yeah, and that was basically a proposal that basically those different elements start using for murals later on. Not the same subject, not the same elements,
Yeah,
but
you can see
basically
it consistently
compositional
going
elements.
through there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this one here.
Yeah, basically this is an image that I use in reference to the earthquake in California.
Is this a detail of?
Yeah, that is not basically that is the whole painting.
Okay.
But I was using different aspects about color and composition.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting.
Do you have another one?
Yeah, you got another one up there.
So this is basically the first sketch, the first approach of that painting that we saw before. And the painting was basically solving the problems about color. So, and if we have any others, so this is, for example, I did this, making like this kind of like a, expressing my concerns about ecology and sustainable practices, and basically how the destruction of nature is represented by death, and then we have the elements of the woods here. So do we have another one? So that's why
this one, okay, yeah.
This-
Very familiar with the Guadalupe.
The Virgin of Guadalupe. That was they have a call for artists at this museum in Mexico, because they were celebrating the 500 years of the apparition of the Virgin, and 500 years of artworks of the Virgin. And then I decided to use the technique of the ex voto, that basically reflects the or express the gratitude of the people that they survive an incident, either way is by illness or by an accident or by a catastrophic event. So and basically that I decided to create the situation in which the people survive, you know, the destruction of the volcano, I mean the destruction of the city by the earthquake, and we have the Virgin as a divine intervention.
Right.
So basically playing with elements of that. So then, and then since then I've been also asked to do religious images too. So the last one was for the grotto, mosaic piece.
Do you have that up there?
No, I don't have it. So
Well, you might talk about that. There's you're changing from painting to mosaic.
Yeah,
right?
I've been painting on acrylic and large scale, but I started being asked to do mosaics, and basically that is the last project that I've been working on on mosaics. So the mosaics that I use, that I do, is basically for housing developments or for institutions like at the Virginia Garcia Health Center. And the last one is for the Vancouver, Washington Housing Authority. And that basically is depicting a landscape. And I'm using glass and tile for those purposes. So unfortunately, all that works are in presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and another document. But I hope to, I mean, people can see those works around the city. So they have.
What you might want to tell people what your website is that they can.
My website is well, they can access some of my works. Recently, I've been posting a lot of the earthquake in Mexico City, but I use my Facebook. Is you can reach me at Hector H. Hernandez.
Okay.
And then you can see that. There are two websites, but one is Hector H. Hernandez. There are three H, so Hector H. Hernandez.
Both of them,
Yeah, and then you can see what I'm producing constantly, because my websites usually they don't have the work that I've been working, or they are in progress. But you can reach me also at the website is hectorhh.com.
Okay.
And also at behance.net /Hector HH.
Good. And we're coming to an end here, so a couple things I wanted to just mention too is that you know, in the arts, I go back to, I studied a lot of history of art in looking at artists that were responding to war, actually. And so here we are, like I said, I'm with Veterans for Peace. A lot of my stuff always deals with the issues of war and peace. And I just wanted to say that people should even know that the Brown Berets were part of the anti-war movement during the Vietnam War. And I wanted to thank you for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate you coming. We're friends, but I wanted the people
thank you for having me.
to meet you and talk to you and see your work. And so, any last word, just to say goodbye?
Well,
we only got a few seconds.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And so please visit my sites, and if you're interested and to reach me and talking to me, so you're welcome. And yeah, so
well, thank you, brother.
Thank you.